Good day, my friends. You are tuned into Facts Me, and I am your humble host, Stephen Lancaster. This is the place where we educate, not fabricate. Some of you may have seen my video on Facebook at facebook.com/canyouffaxme, where I discuss rediscovering my faith. It was a rather candid video. I just kind of turned the camera on and just spoke about denouncing my faith at the age of 19 and how recently I have found my faith again. But since publishing that video, several of you have asked how I would advise educating non-believers about Christianity. People who know me personally understand that I am strong in my convictions and generally only engage in conversation when I am fully informed on a particular subject. That is why I've always excelled at debating. For instance, in college, I defeated every single one of my peers in debate class, even the final boss, the professor. He had to humbly admit that he had lost as well. But that's a story for another time, guys. I have always lived by the philosophy, don't speak unless you can't lose. With that said, rather than simply providing a list of good comebacks on the subject of God, I have decided to dedicate an entire episode of my podcast to this topic. And I think some of you non-believers out there, if you remain rooted in fact and have an open mind, I think you will find much of what I'm about to say relatable and inarguable. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present you with why I can prove God exists. I'm going to start and end this podcast with this question. You already accept invisible truths. Why not the ultimate invisible reality? And I'm going to say that one more time because I want you to think about that question as you listen to everything else I have to say. You already accept invisible truths. Why not the ultimate invisible reality? I want to begin with something that might make some uncomfortable, and that's okay. My goal is not to provoke simply for the sake of provoking, but to challenge what we take for granted. Every day we operate on invisible realities. We believe in love. We believe in hate, anger, joy, grief, compassion, longing, fear. All of these shape our choices, our relationships, and even the course of our lives. Yet science cannot prove the existence of any of them. Science can measure hormones, neural activity, and patterns of behavior, but it cannot measure love itself. It cannot measure the sting of betrayal, the warmth of compassion, or the deep satisfaction of helping another human being. So I want you to think about that for a moment. You trust your love for your spouse, your child, your parent. You act upon it, sacrifice for it, even plan your life around it. And yet, despite the invisibility and its unprovability, in the empirical sense, you accept it as real. Now ask yourself this. If you can trust your experience of love, why is it so difficult to trust billions of human experiences of the divine? Why is it easy to acknowledge emotions that cannot be quantified, but impossible to acknowledge a reality that billions claim to experience? To reject God because he cannot be empirically measured is inconsistent. In fact, it is intellectually hypocritical. Consider the numbers. Approximately 2.8 billion people worldwide, that is billions, report having had religious or mystical experiences. These are not fleeting, shallow experiences. Many are life-changing, altering the course of behavior, relationships, and purpose. Now compare that to the claims in folklore, superstition, or belief in mythical creatures like Bigfoot. A mere fraction of people ever profess those beliefs, and they have no transformative power, no enduring cultural or moral effect. So scale matters. Convergent experience matters. Human experience, when consistent, cumulative, and transformative, is a legitimate form of evidence. So let me now turn to history, because God is not only about feeling or intuition. God intersects with the real, tangible world. Consider Jesus Christ. He was not a myth, a symbolic abstraction, or a literary invention. He was a real, historical figure who walked the hills of first century Judea. Historical sources, philosophical reasoning, and rational analysis converge to affirm this. Whether or not one accepts theological claims about divine intervention, resurrection, or miracles, the evidence for Jesus' historical reality is compelling. Philosophy teaches us an important lesson. Extraordinary effects require adequate causes. Look at the early Christian movement, the spread of Christianity under persecution, the unwavering testimony of early disciples, the profound and enduring influence of culture, law, ethics, and governance. What caused this extraordinary phenomenon? History and reason point to Jesus himself, a real teacher whose life, wisdom, and actions created ripples that shaped civilization. This is not speculation. It is rational inference. If you want to account for extraordinary effects, you must posit an adequate cause. The simplest, most coherent, and historical supported cause is Jesus, the man. Now, some may object, and they may say, but belief in God is irrational because science cannot detect him. Now, I want to return to the idea of science because it is often misunderstood. And before I do, let me just give you a slight brief history on myself. And you may find this odd. You may find it kind of shocking because I believe many of you are discovering me for the first time through this podcast. But since 1997, I have conducted paranormal and spiritual research. I've been in and out of television shows. I've published 6 or 7 books on the subject. And I tackled that research from a scientific standpoint. Looking back, I was almost contradicting myself because man-made science cannot measure something that wasn't man-made. And I'm seeing that much clearer now. If any of you are interested in the paranormal research I've conducted, there's still a little bit of it out there online, not much, but there's still some of it. You can just Google Stephen Lancaster Paranormal and everything will come up. Everything is still available anyway. Just spell my name with a PH and you shouldn't have a problem. Hey, my friends, please join me on Facebook at facebook.com/CanYouFaxMe to continue these discussions, gain access to powerful memes, and leave your thoughts and comments. That is facebook.com/CanYouFaxMe. And that's facts, spelled F-A-C-T-S. See you there. We hear all the time, belief in God is irrational because science cannot detect him. And again, I say, man-made science cannot detect something that wasn't man-made. So I return to the idea of science because it is often misunderstood, as I said earlier. Science is brilliant. Yes, I am firmly rooted in science with many, many things, many topics, many issues. but its brilliance is limited to the study of natural regularities. Science is designed to measure what is repeatable, observable, and of course measurable. Emotions, consciousness, moral truths, purpose, and meaning are all real, yet lie outside the full grasp of experimental science. If we can sit here and accept that love is real without empirical proof, why not accept God under the same standard of that rationality? Consider consciousness. Science can describe neural activity, it can map electrical impulses, it can measure behavior, but it cannot explain why we experience subjective awareness at all. Why does consciousness exist? Why do we have the capacity for awe, for moral reflection, for self-transcendence? These questions are not trivial. They are central to understanding reality. They hint at a metaphysical dimension, a reality that cannot be reduced to mere matter or motion. God offers a coherent framework to explain consciousness, purpose, and the moral law. And to briefly touch base back to when I was conducting paranormal research nearly full time, I have seen things in the spiritual realm. I have witnessed what one would call ghostly apparitions. I know these things exist, but scientifically I could never discover a way to prove it. But I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I've experienced it, and so have many, many others. So there is a dimension out there. There is a consciousness, a metaphysical dimension that we just simply cannot grasp. But it has an origin. Everything has to have an origin. And like I said, God offers this coherent framework. The purpose, the consciousness, the moral law. So speaking of moral law, consider morality itself. We often hear people say, people can be moral without God. And that is very true. When I denounced God at the age of 19, I was still a good person. I still lived life based on morality and good ethics. I still tried to do good things for people. Was I perfect? Absolutely not. Was I a sinner? Absolutely. But I still lived by my own code. And the irony is the fact that it's literally the same code from the Bible. So evolution and social learning explain many behaviors, but they fail to fully account for objective moral values. They fail to fully account for truths that are binding regardless of human opinion. Why do we recognize obligations that demand sacrifice, that run contrary to personal interest, that demand courage and justice at a great cost? If morality is purely evolutionary, why does it command and not just describe? God provides the grounding for objective morality, the standard against which acts of good and evil are measured. Our science cannot measure good and evil. Being subjective cannot measure good and evil. Only God can do that. Only something metaphysical can do that. So let's return to history again. I'm a big history guy. I read a lot. I love digesting information. Beyond Jesus' historical existence, there is the question of his impact, the extraordinary effects he catalyzed. Early Christians facing prosecution were willing to die rather than recant their faith. But why? How can we explain a movement that reshaped entire cultures, inspired countless acts of courage, charity, and moral transformation? Ordinary human ambition, luck, or myth cannot account for this. Philosophy, history, and reason together point to Jesus as a real person whose life had casual power in history. And consider the cumulative case for God. We have the reality of emotions, undeniable yet unprovable by science. Billions of human religious experiences, historical evidence of Jesus Christ, philosophy's reasoning that extraordinary effects require adequate causes, moral and conscious realities that resist purely material explanations. The mystery of the universe's origin, which still to this day science cannot fully explain. We can put a man on the moon. We have created AI. We have done so much in the medical field, so much with technology to make our lives better. But still, we cannot explain the origin of the universe. Because we can't. Man-made science can only explain things that are man-made. Sure, we can say and argue we've learned things about plants and animals, and God created all of that. That's very true. Our science can measure physical mass. Our science can measure that. You cannot measure the metaphysical world. So consider the universe itself. The ultimate cause of everything remains unknown. To claim that God does not exist is not evidence-based. It's an assumption. Not knowing the origin does not mean the origin isn't there. Everything has to have an origin. It's cause and effect. The metaphysical root of all reality, the necessary being from which existence itself emerges, is a rational inference drawn from observation, reason, and reflection. So let me ask you this. If you believe in love, if you believe in anger, if you believe in the unseeable reality of time itself, why is it so difficult to consider God as real? If seeing is the only way to believe, how do you trust anything beyond your senses? History, science, even the internet. The unseen shapes of our lives every day. God, too, is unseen, yet profoundly real. In closing, my friends, belief in God is not a leap in the dark. You're not crazy for believing in God or following a Christian path. It is reasoned, cumulative, and evidence-based. It respects history, philosophy, morality, consciousness, and human experience. It recognizes that some truths are grasped through integration, not isolation. It demands humility, intellectual rigor, and honesty. If you are willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, to weigh human experience alongside history and reason, then the probability of God's existence is not merely plausible, it is rational, coherent, and compelling. So I ask again, if you accept love, grief, morality, consciousness, and historical events that cannot be empirically proven, then the tools are already in your hands to see God. If you examine the life of Jesus, the transformative power of his teaching, and the testimonies of billions, the case becomes undeniable. To deny God is to deny the evidence that surrounds us every day. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, my podcast listeners, God exists, not as a myth, not as an abstraction, but as the rational explanation for reality, consciousness, morality, and history itself. I come full circle back to the question I asked you at the beginning of this episode. You already accept invisible truths. Why not the ultimate invisible reality? Take care, my friends. I'm Stephen Lancaster. Join me on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube to continue this discussion. Be well, be cool, and man, God bless you. Hey, my friends, please join me on Facebook at facebook.com/CanYouFaxMe to continue these discussions, gain access to powerful memes, and leave your thoughts and comments. That is facebook.com/CanYouFaxMe. can you fax me?